Hello, everyone. Today we'd be discussing ethnicity, subcultures, and educational attainment. Ethnicity, subcultures, and educational attainment. Or, in other words, the extent to which your ethnic origin helps you form a subculture and the extent to which that subculture affects your educational attainment. So, we're talking about the relationship between three factors: your subcultures being formed on the basis of your ethnic origin, and those subcultures affecting your educational attainment. There are three factors that we're taking into account today. So, the topic ethnicity, subcultures, and educational attainment, we discuss two theorists over here, three actually. Number one, Louise Archer and Becky Francis. Number two, we talk about the study that was conducted by Tony Sewell initially in 1997, and then based on the findings he had from the study he conducted in 1997, what did he conclude in 2008? So number one, number two, number three. These are the three theories that we'll be taking into account. And before I even begin, let me remind you all this subtopic, this ethnicity, subcultures, and educational attainment. This is a subtopic of ethnicity and educational attainment. And ethnicity and educational attainment is again a subtopic of the factors that affect educational attainment. Let me just write it down over here. The outschool factors, rather, factors that affect your educational attainment, factors that affect educational attainment. External factors, also referred to as outschool factors. Now, as we talk about these factors, number one, we had spoken about intelligence first. Then we had spoken about social class. While discussing social class, we had further subdivided into material factors. Then we had spoken about cultural factors. And then we had spoken about in-school factors, factors within school that affect your educational attainment. And third over here, third in line over here is ethnicity, followed by gender. So ethnicity followed by gender. The fourth factor over here is gender. So this is a subtopic of, let me show it to you. This that we're doing today is a subtopic of this. This is a subtopic of this. Now, without any further ado, let's begin. Ethnicity, subcultures, and educational attainment. There are three theories that I said we'd be discussing over here. Right. Now, when we speak about ethnicity, subcultures, and educational attainment, there are two examples that we'd use. Number one, we'd speak about individuals from the Chinese origin, we'd speak about British Chinese individuals, and then we'd speak about Black masculinities. Okay. Now, when we talk about the role ethnicity plays, I'm sure you'd all agree that individuals do form subcultures. Individuals do form subcultures based on their ethnic origin. Individuals do form subcultures on the basis of their ethnic origin. Now, when we talk about a subculture, my dear, is a distinctive set of social norms, the values, your customs, your traditions, what you value, what you do not, and a lot more to it. So, the subcultures that you form, what is a subculture? We could talk about a subculture being a set of different values, different norms, and we're talking about the role subculture plays in terms of explaining differences in educational attainment. Now, taking this ahead. So once we're done with this topic, we would find out how these different subcultures influence the members' educational attainment. How? One. Number two, and do members of a subculture have other identities that might also influence their achievement? Right. Number three, how easy is it to disentangle the influence of ethnicity, class, and gender on educational attainment? The evaluative bit, AO3, right? AO3 is evaluation and analysis. I'm sure we all know. Now, to begin with, like I said, we'd initially talk about the British Chinese student subculture. The British Chinese student subculture. British Chinese students are the ones who get the highest grades in the GCSE. They have the highest number of percentage when it comes to students going to the university as well. According to this study, my dear, that was conducted by Louise Archer and 2000 and Becky Francis, the study that was conducted by Louise Archer and Becky Francis in the year 2007, what they found out was, and we talk about what we discuss what they found out. Now this particular study that was conducted in 2007, like I said, they conducted or they collected their data from 80 British Chinese students, 30 Chinese parents, and 30 teachers. They were all from schools in London. So 80 British Chinese students again, 30 Chinese parents, and 30 teachers. Right now, these students, my dear, their age range from 14 to 16 years. What data did they, what research or data collection method did they use? They use semi-structured interviews. Semi-structured interviews, remember, are the usage of semi-structured interviews or qualitative interviews is advocated by interpretivists. This would give us qualitative data, which many people believe is high in terms of validity, which adds depth and detail to your findings. Okay. Now, the study by Louise Archer and Becky Francis, they conducted a semi-structured interviews with 80 14 to 16-year-old British Chinese students, 30 Chinese parents, and 30 teachers from school in London, England, and that they had Chinese students. Parents from, now what they found out was parents from all social classes, according to Archer and Francis, parents from all social classes, regardless of the social class these kids belong to, their parents placed a very high value on education, and so did the children. So it is a cultural aspect. It's a cultural aspect, a subcultural aspect, when both parents and children, regardless of the social class they belong to, where both parents and children, regardless of the social class they belong to, when they place a lot of value on the educational attainment of their pupil. Working class parents with little formal education themselves, they were passionately committed towards providing the children with the opportunities they had lacked. So even when we speak about Chinese parent who did not have who did not have very high formal education themselves, probably belonging to the working class, right? Even those parents, they were very passionate, they looked very committed towards providing the children with the opportunities that they thought they themselves lacked. According to Archer and Francis, both middle class and working class students, they saw university as a must. According to them, sending their children to the university was a must. There was no option of not making or having the child attend a university. All 80 students interviewed said they wanted to go to the university. So the point that we are trying to make over here is the subcultural values, the norms, your value system, the extent to which your value system considers education important, or the extent to which your value system feels that education is that vehicle, that tool that would help you that would help you in terms of advancements in your life, that would provide you with better life chances, that would provide you with better better opportunities life, that would help you actually experience an upward social mobility. Right now, taking this ahead, parents, according to Archer and Francis again, parents invested considerable amount of time, considerable amount of energy, considerable amount of money in their children. They monitored their children's progress, and they often hired home tutors, of course, for the ones who could afford, and they arranged supplementary schooling for the kids as well. Now, according to Archer and Francis, these parents, they saw, or these families, they saw, or the British or the Chinese subculture, they saw education as a family project. I'll say that again. They saw education as a family project. For them, the kids being educated was considered to be very important for them. When we use the word family project, what does it mean? The entire family is involved. When we're talking about parents, putting in time. Of course, it's an investment, right? When they're putting in time, when they're putting in energy, when they're ready to make financial sacrifices, when they have their own involvement. Remember, this says they monitored their child's progress and they often hired home tutors. Now, all of this reflects involvement. All of this reflects involvement that these parents from the Chinese origin or these families from the Chinese origin showed in their child's education. Now, additionally, a family's standing in the community was partly related to the educational performance of their children, right? This might be very relatable to students from Pakistan as well. In many cases, your families, your parents, they're worried about you not performing well. One, it would put you into disadvantaged position in your future. Number two, many families over here in South Asian countries like Pakistan, they are concerned about where they're concerned about their child's performance, because then there's a lot of comparison. I mean, my kid got this many years, your kid got this many years, so on and so forth. The children appreciated their parents high expectations, encouragement and support. These findings applied both to the middle class and the working class families. To some extent, the high value placed on education is due to the Chinese subculture. Remember, my dear, we're discussing all of this under the heading of the involvement or the affect your subculture. Your subculture based on your ethnic origin could affect your educational attainment. Your subculture based on your education, your subculture based on your ethnic origin affecting your educational attainment. In this respect, the high attainment of Chinese students may be partly result of their subculture. So, in a nutshell, a study conducted by Archer and Francis in the year 2007. According to them, it is the subculture of British Chinese families and that eventually helps their students do well in education, right? It is a subculture that is helping these kids perform better, regardless of the social class they belong to. They all placed a high value, or rather a very high value, on education of their children. Now, taking this a step ahead, number two. Number two, if we take this ahead, we'd have a look at the study that was conducted by Tony Sewell. I'd want you all to know Mr. Tony Sewell a bit before we proceed. Now, Sewell is a British educational consultant and a founder and chair of the educational charity Generating Genius. In July 2020, Sewell was appointed to chair the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities, tasked with looking into race disparity in the UK. Now, this British educationist, education consultant from a Black origin himself. Let's have a look at his research that were based on the research that his conclusions that were based on the research that he conducted in 1997. So, according to Sewell, the general perception held by many is it is the education system. The general perception held by many is that it is the education system that puts individuals from a Black background into a disadvantaged position, right? It is a perception held by many, again, that it is the education system or it is the society as a whole that is typically blamed when it comes to the underperformance of individuals from Black origin. Tony Sewell, being a Black researcher himself, he questions this, right? Now, he questions this, or he doesn't really agree to it. According to him, it is not the educational institution that should be blamed for the underperformance of these Black pupils, right? Now, let me read this out so that you have a better understanding. Sewell in 2008 questions some accounts which suggest that Black underachievement is based on institutional racism in school. He's questioning this. So he's not really agreeing to the idea that it is institutional racism being experienced by Black pupils within school that is to be held responsible, or that is to be blamed for the underperformance of these Black pupils. In his view, the idea that teachers are directly or indirectly holding Black students is questionable. So he is again not holding the institutions responsible. He's not holding the teachers responsible either. However, according to Tony Seville, or according to Seville, if there's anyone to be blamed, it is the subculture. Remember, my dear, we're discussing this under the heading of the value subculture holds over here, right? So, according to Seville, it is the subculture of these individuals, their subcultural values that lead to their inability, their unwillingness, right? Now, these two terms, the unwillingness, according to him, Black pupils, they probably not really willing to, they probably not really able to, right? They're not really willing to, and they're not really able to break away from an anti-education peer group. So, according to him, it is the Black subculture. It is these Black masculinities, or the perceptions they hold about Black masculinities these young boys hold, that should be blamed. According to Seville, it is their inability, it is their unwillingness to break away from an anti-education peer group, to be able to break away from an anti-education peer group. In other words, if these Black pupils, they're not doing well, if these Black pupils, they're not doing well, they're probably not able to do well because they're not ready, or because they're not really able to let go, they're not really able to let go of their own subcultural values. What sort of subcultural values are we talking about over here? Now, it's the inability and unwillingness of these students to break away from an anti-education peer group that loves the street rather than the classroom. Now, the subcultural values, or the deviance that is typically associated with young Black people. According to Seville, these young boys from the Black, from these young Black boys from the Black Caribbean origin, they aren't really ready to, they aren't really able to let go of their street subculture that is actually anti-education, right? Until and unless they let go of these subcultural values that keep them away from educational attainment, according to Seville, they cannot do well. So, in a nutshell, according to Seville, it is not the school that should be blamed. It is not the teachers that should be blamed. If it's anything, it is the subcultural values of these Black pupils, these subcultural values that are anti-education, the peer group, the people of their own age, how they love the streets more than being in the classroom. Now, like I said, this was a conclusion that was put forward by Seville in the year 2008. However, this is based on his study that he conducted in 1997. However, Seville's 1997 conclusions discussed below are based on the earlier findings from an ethnographic study of Black Caribbean boys in an 11 to 16-year-old school in Britain. He emphasizes the complex interplay between factors such as teacher racism, student subcultures, and negative peer group pressure within the school. So, according to Seville, it's not as simple as people portray it to be like. It's very typical and very easy to blame the institution. However, according to Seville, this is a lot more complex. It's a lot more tangled than people think it is. So there are multiple factors to begin with: teacher racism, then the students' own subcultural values, and the students' own peer group pressure that together affect the experiences that these young boys have at school. Now, to begin with, Black masculinities in school. This study was conducted by Civil in the year 1997. Seville identified four main groups of Black students in the school he studied, which reflect different versions of Black masculinities. So he identified four main groups of Black students. What Seville is doing is he is dividing these Black students into four main groups. And According to him, these young Black pupils could be broadly put into these four different groups that would help us understand the differences amongst them and that would help us understand their educational performance. To begin with, if we talk about these four different groups, the first over here are the conformists. Number two, the innovators. Let's learn them together. Number one, conformists. Number two, innovators. Number three, the retreaters, and the fourth are the rebels, right? Four different groups. Number one, conformists. Number two, innovators. Number three, retreaters. Number four, rebels. Let's do it again. Number one, conformists. Number two, innovators. Number three, retreaters. Number four, rebels. These four different subgroups that Tony Seville, through his research, he identified, or he put Black pupils from a Black heritage or Black Caribbean background into four different groups to explain differences in educational attainment. Now, the first one here, the conformists. Who are these conformists now? Conformists, according to Seville, they made up the largest group. They made up around 41% of his sample. That's quite a number. These conformists, they saw education as a route to success, and they conformed to the norms and values of school, and hence we're referring to them as the conformists. So two things to keep in mind about these conformists. Number one, they were the largest group comprising of 41% of a sample. Number two, these young boys, they saw education as a route to success. Number two, innovators. These young boys, they also saw education as important, but they rejected the process of schooling, that the schooling and the demands that they saw it as making on their identity and behavior. So these innovators, they were not anti-education. If anything, they were anti-school. The rules, regulations, the expectations, the demands the education system had from them, or the school had from them, they were not ready to adhere to them, right? So although they were anti-school, however, it is important to keep in mind, although they were anti-school, not anti-education, okay? Although they were anti-school, they attempted to keep out of trouble, right? So two groups, the conformists and the innovators. Conformists 41%, innovators 35%. That together makes it around 76% of pupils from the sample that was studied by Seville. These 76% of pupils, they were not anti-education. Amongst these, there were 35% who were anti-schooling, maybe, but they were not and they were not anti-education. The third group, the retreatists. The retreaters made 6%. They were loners and they kept themselves to themselves. Many of them, they had educational needs too. So they were the ones who'd keep to themselves. They would not interact with many people. However, the fourth group that's worthy noting over here are the rebels. They were 18%. The word rebels pretty much explains it all. They rejected both the norms and the values of the school and the importance of education. So these rebels, they were anti-school and they were anti-education, right? Many saw education qualification as worthless, as racism would disqualify them from high status, well paid jobs. Remember, subculture, we're discussing all under the heading of the subculture that you hold. If you're a part of a subcultural group that sees educational qualification as worthless, if you're a part of a subcultural group who carries the mindset that because of racism, you would not be able to get a high status, well paid job, don't you think that pretty much explains them not wanting to perform well, them not wanting to put in effort when it comes to education, right? The rebels reacted aggressively to what they saw as racism in school. They were confrontational and challenging. They adopted a macho masculinity and demanded respect. So four different categories that were put forward by Tony Seville. To begin with, we spoke about the conformists that made around 41% of the sample that he studied. Next in line were the innovators that made 35%. The third in line over here were the retreaters that made 6%, the ones who kept to themselves. And the fourth was rebels who rejected, who very openly rejected both the norms and values of the school as well as the importance of education, right? They were aggressive. They used to they had this confrontational attitude. They used to challenge the racism. They used to challenge what they saw as racist attitude, and they adopted a very macho masculinity and demanded respect. So this is according to Sewell. Again, these differences in educational performance according to Sewell can be explained better through the subcultural values of these Black pupils and not the education system. Or according to Sewell, the education system should not be seen as as institutionally racist. Now, what does the word institutional racism over here mean? The idea that organization as a whole is carries a very racist attitude. The organization as a whole turns out to be or ends up being racist, right? Now, taking this ahead, let's evaluate this in the next few minutes, and then we're done with this topic. So, there are people who've criticized Sewell's idea. Pretty pretty much expected, because Sewell came up with an idea which was not thought of before, which was not popular before. Remember, the typical idea carried about, or the typical explanation provided for the underachievement of Black Caribbean pupils is that they are experiencing racism. It's the teacher that is blamed. It is the education institution that is blamed. It is the society as a whole that is blamed. So critiques argue that Sewell blames Black Caribbean males for their underachievement. They suggest that in the process, Sewell has diverted attention from what they regard as the real cause of Black underachievement. So the people who criticize Tony Sewell, they feel it is because of the racist society. It is because of the racist education system, and it is because of economic deprivation that these young Black boys end up underperforming in education or not doing well in education, right? So according to them, the real cause, or according to them, Sewell has diverted attention from what they saw the real cause was behind the underachievement of these Black pupils. However, there are supporters of Sewell as well, right? So supporters of Sewell reject this criticism. They argue that Sewell has actually attempted to describe and explain rather than allocate blame. So the people who support Sewell's ideas, according to them, if anything, Sewell has tried to describe what has led to this underperformance. He's trying to explain the underperformance of these Black pupils. He has not blamed authorities. He's not blamed the teachers, the system, or the society. Instead, through his ethnographic study, he has come up with findings that weren't really thought of before. According to him, it is the subcultural values of these Black pupils that are to be, or that should be blamed. Remember, according to Sewell, it is the inability and the unwillingness of these Black pupils that has led to them underperforming. In addition, so we're talking about the supporters of Sewell here, okay? Now, in addition, his research rejects the stereotype of the young, aggressive Black male personified by the rebels. Now, remember, before this, I'll take you here. So remember, these rebels, if anything, they were just 18%, right? If anything, they were just 18%, right? And 18% is not a big number. According to the supporters of Sewell, the personification of a male Black pupil as a rebel isn't really justifiable, because 18% is, if you're talking about I mean, you just because 18%, that is less than 20%, just because 18% of individuals they behave in a particular manner, you cannot lump up all Black Caribbean boys, or you cannot personify, or you cannot describe, or you cannot blame all Black pupils to be like this. They were just 18% of them. So In addition, his research rejects the stereotype of the younger, aggressive black male personified by the rebels by showing that they formed only a relatively small minority, that is 18% of the black Caribbean boys in the schools he studied. So we just spoke about the subcultural explanations. We just spoke about subcultural explanations towards understanding the differences in educational attainment. We had discussed this under the heading ethnicity and educational achievement. Before this, we had already covered topics such as racism in school and cultural explanations. I hope this video must have helped. Take good care of yourselves. Stay happy, healthy, safe, and protected. Stay humble, spread positivity, spread smiles, and Allah Hafiz.